There are secrets that people carry for years, not the small, ordinary secrets that everyone keeps, the impulse purchases, the old embarrassments, the private regrets that never quite fade. These are the large ones, the kind that require daily maintenance, the kind that demand a second story running perfectly beneath the first, never allowed to break the surface. The kind that slowly turn a person into two completely different people depending on who is standing in front of them. Curtis Beaumont had been running 2 stories for 9 years. In the first story, he was a devoted husband and father in Charlotte, North Carolina, a man who coached youth basketball, grilled in the backyard on summer evenings, and was regarded by everyone who knew him as reliable and decent. In the second story, he was something else entirely. And that second story, managed with considerable discipline for nearly a decade, came to its end on a Friday afternoon in June under the lights of the Family Feud studio. It did not end because of an investigation. It did not end because someone found something they were not supposed to find. It ended the way the most dramatic truths always end, quietly, unexpectedly, through the specific combination of a live television camera, a room full of strangers, a standard question about marriage, and a woman named Valerie Beaumont who had been carrying something of her own for 8 months and had simply decided in that moment that she was done carrying it alone. The audience gasped. That is what everyone remembers, the sound of 200 people understanding something at the exact same moment, all of them drawing the same breath in the same instant. It is the sound of collective recognition, the sound of a room full of strangers watching a truth arrive. Steve Harvey stood at the center of that room and did what he always does when something real happens on his stage. He put the entertainer down and picked up the human being instead. What he said in the minutes that followed has been quoted and discussed by millions of viewers because it was not a speech about one marriage. It was a statement about all of them. Valerie Beaumont was 51 years old, and the word people used most often to describe her was steady, not in the way that means uninteresting, in the way that means reliable under pressure. The kind of steadiness built by a person who has faced hard things and made a practice of not being undone by them. She had grown up in Winston-Salem, the second of 4 children. Her mother cleaned houses during the week and sang in the church choir on Sundays. Her father worked 2 jobs for most of her childhood and came home tired every night and loved his family with the fierce, quiet intensity of a man who understands exactly what he is working for. From both of them, Valerie had inherited a practical faith and an unsentimental strength that expressed itself not in dramatic gestures, but in consistency, in showing up, in doing what needed to be done, in building a life that had real things in it. She had worked as a licensed practical nurse for 23 years. She had raised 2 children, a daughter named Simone who was 24 and a son named Andre who was 21. With the attentive hands-on energy of a woman who had decided early on that parenting was her most important job. She had kept a clean house, managed a tight budget through lean years, attended every school event, and built the kind of household that people from the outside looked at and called blessed. She had also, for the past 8 months, known something about her husband that had changed the entire architecture of everything she thought she had built. She had not told anyone, not Simone, not Andre, not her sister Patricia, who was her closest friend. She had carried it alone, through the ordinary days of an ordinary life, making school lunches and attending Sunday services and sitting across from Curtis at dinner and passing the salt when he asked for it. She had carried it the way strong women carry impossible things, quietly, and at considerable cost to herself, because she had not yet decided what to do with it, and she was not the kind of woman who acted before she was ready. She had not planned to do anything with it on a Friday afternoon in June. She had planned to play a game show. What happened instead was something she would later describe as the moment the weight became too heavy to hold in the direction she had been holding it, and simply fell. Curtis Beaumont was 53 years old and had, for most of his adult life, been genuinely good at 2 things, his work and his appearances. He managed a regional distribution center for a large retail company, a logistics operation that required real competence and real leadership, both of which he had. He was respected by his staff. He was trusted by his superiors. He solved problems efficiently and without drama, and was the kind of manager that organizations promote steadily because he reliably made the numbers work. He was also, in social settings, the kind of man people remembered warmly. He was engaged and attentive in conversations. He asked about people's children and remembered their names at the next encounter. He had a warmth that was not performed, it was real, which is what made everything else so complicated. Curtis Beaumont was not a man without genuine feeling. He was a man whose genuine feelings had found more recipients than his wife knew about. The double life had begun 9 years earlier, 2 years into what both of them had understood to be a period of distance in their marriage. Both of them had been working long hours. Both of them had been tired. The connection between them had thinned in the way it thins in marriages that nobody is actively tending, and Curtis had responded to that thinning by turning outward rather than inward. He had met a woman through work, a regional sales coordinator named Diane, and what began as a professional relationship had become something more, slowly and then not slowly, until it had a parallel life of its own that ran alongside his real one with terrifying smoothness. The distance in his marriage had eventually closed. He and Valerie had found their way back to each other in the gradual way that long marriages sometimes do. But by then, the second relationship was established. An ending it had never quite happened, and the years had accumulated around it the way years accumulate around any persistent thing, covering it, normalizing it, making it feel, in the specific self-deception that sustains these situations, almost inevitable. He had agreed to Family Feud because Valerie wanted to go, and because he was a man who had learned to manage his guilt by giving his wife what she asked for when she asked for it. He had smiled through the application process and the flight to Los Angeles and the tourist day and the hotel dinner. He was good at smiling. 9 years of practice. The Beaumont team was 5. Curtis and Valerie, their daughter Simone, who was 24 and had recently started a teaching position at an elementary school in Charlotte, their son Andre, who was 21 and finishing his junior year in college, and Valerie's younger sister Patricia, who was 47 and had the specific energy of a woman who has been watching someone she loves endure something she cannot quite name for a long time. Patricia knew something was wrong with Valerie. She had known it for months, not the specifics, but the shape of it. The way Valerie had gone slightly inward. The way certain silences had a weight in them that ordinary silences do not. She had asked twice, gently, and Valerie had said she was tired, and Patricia had accepted that and waited. Patricia was good at waiting. The two sisters had always had the kind of closeness that does not require constant articulation, a frequency between them that communicated more than words, and which had been transmitting distress on Valerie's end for longer than either of them had formally acknowledged. Simone and Andre did not know anything was wrong. They were the way young adult children often are, present enough to love their parents fully and not present enough to read the finer frequencies of the household they had grown up in. They had flown to Los Angeles with the uncomplicated excitement of people in their early 20s who have been offered a free trip to California and a chance to be on television. Curtis sat between his wife and his daughter on the flight and watched movies, and accepted the drink the flight attendant offered and looked out the window at the country passing below him and thought, briefly, about what he was standing on. He did not think about it for long. He was good at not thinking about it for long. The Family Feud studio had the particular brightness of a place designed to make everything feel possible. The lights warm and high, the audience buzzing, the whole apparatus of a well-run television production organized around the goal of manufacturing joy. The Beaumont family arrived and was absorbed into that warmth the way guests always are, and for a while the warmth was real. Simone and Andre were electric with it. Patricia was charmed. Even Valerie, moving through the pre-taping procedures with the professional calm of a woman who has worked in hospitals for 23 years, relaxed her shoulders a degree or two. Curtis was excellent. He was always excellent in public situations. He chatted with the production staff, made the warm-up comedian laugh, and stood in the green room with the easy posture of a man who feels at home anywhere because he has learned, out of necessity, to feel at home anywhere. Steve Harvey came out and did what Steve Harvey does, and the room went up the way it always does. He worked his way through the Beaumont family with warmth and humor, teasing Andre gently about his college team, complimenting Patricia's energy, telling Simone she had the smile of someone about to win something. Then he reached Curtis and Valerie. He shook Curtis's hand and exchanged the standard pleasantries. Then he turned to Valerie, and something in his manner shifted almost imperceptibly. Not a dramatic change, just a small recalibration of attention, the kind that happens when a person in the business of reading people encounters someone worth reading carefully. "Valerie," he said, "how are you doing today?" "I'm doing well," she said. "Ready to play?" "You sure about that?" Steve said. It was a light question, the kind he asks dozens of times per taping. But he was looking at her with more directness than the question required. "Yes," Valerie said, and then, after a pause so brief that most people missed it, "There's a lot I'm ready to do today." Steve Harvey looked at her for just a moment longer than necessary. He moved on. He was a professional. but he had heard something in those 8 words that he was going to keep his ear trained toward for the rest of the afternoon. The Beaumont family was matched against the Okonkwo family from Atlanta, a tight, fast 5-person team anchored by a 48-year-old mother named Grace who had the competitive instincts of a woman who had been the best at everything she did her entire life and saw no reason to change course on a game show stage. The game was close throughout, trading leads twice in the first 3 rounds. Curtis played well, fast buzzer, good instincts, crowd-pleasing delivery. Andre was quick and reliable. Patricia buzzed in on the 3rd question with an answer so unexpectedly specific that Steve Harvey looked at her and said, "Where did that come from?" Patricia said, "Church, baby," and the audience laughed for a full 10 seconds. But it was Valerie who anchored the game. She did not play with flash. She played with precision, the same precision she brought to a hospital ward, the same eye for what the situation actually required rather than what would look impressive. She hit 2 top answers in back-to-back rounds that kept the Beaumonts in contention when the Okonkwos were threatening to extend their lead. And she did it with the composed efficiency of someone who had simply decided to be very good at this, and then been very good at it. The Beaumonts won the main game by 19 points. The celebration was warm, 5 people who loved each other in the genuine way families do, all of the complications beneath the surface temporarily suspended by the uncomplicated pleasure of winning something together. Steve Harvey watched Valerie during the celebration. She hugged her children. She accepted her sister's embrace. She stood beside Curtis during the final round of applause and she was smiling and the smile was real, and also, Steve thought, carrying something underneath it that smiles are not meant to carry. Steve gathered the family at center stage. 2 players, 5 questions each. 200 points to win $20,000, the team discussed briefly. Curtis said he should go, he had been fast on the buzzer all game and felt confident. Valerie said that was fine, there was no argument about it. They agreed that Curtis would go first and Valerie would close. The family was taken backstage to wait while Valerie stepped to the fast money podium. She stood there while the production team made their final checks, and in those 30 seconds of preparation, 30 seconds in which nobody was watching her particularly closely, she stood very still and looked at a point somewhere beyond the set and made a decision that she had been moving toward for 8 months without fully acknowledging it. She was going to answer the questions honestly, all of them, whatever was asked. Steve positioned himself across from her. "Miss Valerie," he said, "you've been the quiet force on this team all day. How are you feeling?" "Honest," she said. Steve held her gaze for a moment. "All right then, clock starts now." Valerie answered the first 4 questions with clean, controlled accuracy. Steve asked her to name something a wife hides from her husband. She said, how much she really spent, which landed as the number 2 answer at 26 points. He asked her to name a reason a couple might sleep in separate rooms. She said snoring, number 1 answer, 44 points. He asked her to name something that keeps a marriage strong. She said honesty, number 2 answer at 31 points, and she said it without looking anywhere other than directly at the camera. The 4th question, name something a wife does when she suspects her husband is hiding something. Valerie said, she watches and she waits. That was a 2-part answer, and technically it should not have worked. But the board turned and there it was, watches and waits. Number 3 answer, 18 points, because enough people surveyed had said exactly that. 119 points after 4 questions. The studio was warm and engaged. Nothing had happened yet, or rather, nothing had happened yet that the audience could see. Something had been building in the room for the past 3 minutes that most of them could feel without being able to name. Then came the 5th question. "Okay, Miss Valerie," Steve said. "Last one, name something a wife finds out about her husband that completely changes how she sees him." The question was designed for light answers, bad cooking habits, a childhood fear, an embarrassing old photo. The kind of small revelation that gets a laugh and moves on. Valerie was quiet for 2 seconds. In fast money, 2 seconds is a long time. Then she said, that he has been living a completely different life from the one he told me about, for 9 years. The studio went silent, not the silence of confusion or misunderstanding. The specific silence of an entire room of people absorbing something that is clearly not a joke and clearly not part of the game and clearly coming from a place far deeper than a survey answer. And then the gasp came. 200 people drawing breath at the same time. The sound of collective recognition. Steve Harvey did not move for a moment. He stood completely still, microphone at his side, looking at Valerie with the expression of a man who has just understood the shape of everything he had been sensing for the past hour. Valerie was looking straight ahead. Her hands were folded in front of her on the podium. Her face was composed. She had said what she said, and she was still standing, and she was not going to perform grief for a room full of people. She had performed composure for 8 months. She was done performing anything. From backstage in the soundproofed waiting area where Curtis was watching his wife's round on a monitor, there was a sound. The production assistant who was stationed there described it later as the sound of a chair being pushed back. Then nothing. Steve Harvey set his index card down on the podium. He did not look at the board. He looked at Valerie. "Valerie," he said quietly, "I have to ask you directly, was that answer what you just said, is that something real? Something happening in your actual life?" "Yes," she said, her voice was level. "I found out 8 months ago." Steve took a slow breath. He turned and looked at the audience, who were still completely still, and he turned back. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It had the quality it gets when he is not performing anything, when something has moved past the game and into the real territory where he is most himself. "8 months," he said. "You have been carrying this for 8 months." It was not a question, it was recognition. "Yes," she said, "and you came here today anyway. You played this game, you carried your team." He paused. "Why?" Valerie was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, it was with the careful precision of a woman who had thought about this for a long time and had finally found the words. "Because I was not going to let what he did take one more thing from me," she said. "He already took 9 years. He was not going to take this day, too." The silence that followed was the longest of the afternoon. Then the applause came, not the quick reflex kind, but the slow, full kind that builds from the back of a room when something true has been said, and people need a moment to understand why it affected them before they can respond to it. It came in a wave, and when it hit the front of the studio, it was standing. Every person in that room was on their feet. Valerie stood at the podium and received it with her chin up and her hands still folded and her eyes full but not spilling. She had not come here to be applauded. She had come here to stop being quiet. But she received it the way people receive something they did not ask for and did not expect and needed more than they knew, with the full weight of her composure, which was the most dignified thing in the room. Steve Harvey raised his hand for quiet, and the room settled. He stood for a moment and looked at the audience, and then turned to address both the live crowd and the cameras with the directness he reserves for things he means completely. "I want to say something," he said, "and I want to say it to everyone watching this in this room and at home, because what just happened here is not about a game show. What just happened here is about something that happens in houses all across this country, behind closed doors, in the silence of bedrooms and kitchen tables and car rides where nobody says what is actually going on." He paused. "There are people watching this right now who know exactly what Valerie is talking about. Not because the same thing happened to them specifically. Maybe it did, maybe it did not. But because they know what it is to carry something heavy inside a marriage and keep showing up anyway. Keep making the meals and going to work and sitting in the pew on Sunday and holding it all together on the outside while something is broken on the inside. And nobody sees it. Because you are too strong or too proud or too uncertain about what comes next to let anyone see it." He looked at Valerie. "This woman just told you that she was not going to let what someone else did take one more thing from her. I want you to hear that. I want every person who has ever felt robbed by someone they trusted, their time, their years, their belief in what they thought they had built. I want you to hear that sentence, and I want you to write it somewhere you will see it. Because that is not defeat. That is the beginning of something." The room was quiet again, the way rooms go quiet when something has landed all the way. "Valerie," Steve said, "you came here today and you played the best fast money round I have seen in months. You scored points on every single question. And the last answer, the honest one, I am going to tell you something. That answer did not just score points on a board. That answer just changed your life because you said it out loud. And once you say the truth out loud, it belongs to you. Nobody can take it back. Nobody can make it small. It is yours, and you are free." The production team had to make a decision in the minutes following Valerie's round. Curtis was backstage. The game was technically still in progress. Valerie had scored 137 points, and Curtis needed 63 more from his round to win the $20,000. One of the senior producers walked back to speak to Curtis. What that conversation contained has never been fully disclosed. What is known is that Curtis sat in the backstage room for approximately 4 minutes. Then he walked out. He walked slowly. He walked like a man who has had a weight he was carrying suddenly doubled in the span of 5 minutes and is not entirely sure his legs are going to continue cooperating. He came to the center of the stage and he stood there and he looked at his wife. Valerie looked back at him. She did not look away. She did not look angry or devastated or triumphant. She looked the way she had looked at everything all day, steady. That steadiness was the most powerful thing in the room. More powerful than tears, more powerful than accusation, more powerful than anything Curtis could have said or done in that moment. She was simply there and she was whole, and whatever he had believed about what his secret life was costing her, The full cost was standing right in front of him, and it was larger than he had allowed himself to understand. Steve Harvey stood between them and spoke quietly, almost gently. "Curtis," he said, "I am not going to make this harder than it already is. But I am going to ask you one thing, and I think everyone in this room, including your wife, deserves an honest answer. Did you know that she knew?" Curtis looked at the floor for a moment, then he looked up. "No," he said, "I did not know she knew." Steve nodded slowly. "And now you do." He paused. "What do you want to say to her?" Curtis turned to Valerie. The room was completely silent. The cameras were on him. 200 people were watching. And all of that, the cameras, the audience, the lights, the entire apparatus of a television production fell away because what was happening in the space between these two people was private in the way that only the most important human moments are private, even when they happen in public. He said, "I am sorry. I know that is not enough. I know there is nothing I can say right now that is enough, but I am sorry." Valerie looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I know you are." And she turned back to face forward, and her chin was still up, and she was still standing. Steve Harvey looked at both of them for a moment. Then he took a breath and did something that surprised everyone in the room. He looked at Curtis and said, "You have 63 points to get. Your family is counting on you, so let's play." It was the most humane thing he could have done. It gave Curtis something to do with his hands. It gave the room a direction. And it gave Valerie, who had just done the hardest thing she had ever done in public, the dignity of not being made into a scene that was still about her husband, even in his moment of accountability. Curtis stood at the fast money podium and answered 5 questions in the focused, mechanical way that a man answers questions when he has just had the floor pulled out from under him and is not yet sure if he is going to fall. He was not fast. He was not charming. He was present, which under the circumstances was everything he had. He scored 71 points. The Beaumont family finished with 208 points over the threshold. They had won the $20,000. The board lit up and there was applause, but it was a different kind of applause than a Family Feud win usually generates. It was quieter and more complicated, threaded through with the particular feeling of a room that has watched something real happen and is not entirely sure how to hold both the joy and the grief of it at the same time. Simone had been crying since Valerie's 5th answer. Andre stood very still with his arms crossed, and his jaw set in the way that young men hold themselves together when they are trying not to fall apart in public. Patricia had both hands over her mouth and was looking at her sister with an expression that contained 24 years of sisterhood and the specific grief of a woman who had sensed something was wrong and had not known how to reach it. Valerie stood with her family around her, and she was steady. She was, and had always been, the steadiest person in the room. The production team arranged for the Beaumont family to have a private room immediately after the taping. This was not standard procedure. It was a decision made by the senior producer on duty, who had been in the television business for 22 years and had never seen anything quite like what had just happened on her stage, and who understood without being told that a family needed a door that closed. What happened in that room has not been shared publicly, and it should not be. What Valerie has said, in the single interview she gave more than a year after the episode aired, is this: "We were a family in that room. Whatever had broken between me and Curtis, we were still a family, and my children needed to see that their mother was not going to fall apart. So I did not fall apart. I sat in a chair and I held their hands and I told them that we were going to be all right, because we were, because I was. Even if I was not entirely sure of that yet, I knew it was true enough to say." Curtis sat across the room. He did not try to explain himself. Understood, in the specific way that people understand things when the full weight of them has finally landed, that there was nothing to explain that would help. He sat there with his grief and his shame, and the particular reckoning of a man who has watched the consequences of his choices arrive and cannot dispute a single one of them. Patricia sat beside her sister and said nothing and held her hand, and that was exactly the right thing. The episode aired on a Thursday evening 6 weeks after the taping. The production team had contacted the Beaumont family before making any decisions about broadcast, and Valerie had given her consent. Her reasoning, as she described it, was simple. "I said it. I meant it. I am not ashamed of it. Let it air." Within 4 hours of broadcast, the clip had been shared 22 million times. By the following morning, the number was over 50 million. By the end of the week, it had crossed 100 million views across all platforms combined, making it, at the time, one of the most watched clips in the show's history. The response was unlike anything the show's social media team had ever managed. There were, of course, reactions of every kind, because the internet is the internet and produces every kind of response to every kind of thing. But the dominant current was something more specific and more personal than general opinion. It was people writing about their own lives, about the years they had spent suspecting something and saying nothing, about the weight of carrying a truth that you have not yet decided what to do with, about the specific, unspectacular courage of waking up every morning and continuing to function while something inside you is in crisis. Valerie's sentence, "He was not going to take this day too," became, within 48 hours, one of the most widely shared short statements on the internet. It appeared on the pages of grief counselors and divorce attorneys and marriage therapists, each of them noting something different in it: the ownership, the refusal, the forward motion. It was printed on cards. It was posted in support group forums. It was quoted in a Sunday sermon in Memphis that was then itself shared 300,000 times. Steve Harvey's speech, specifically the section about people who carry heavy things inside marriages and keep showing up anyway, generated hundreds of thousands of responses from people who described it as the first time they had heard their own private experience named out loud by someone who was not them. 14 months after the episode aired, Valerie agreed to speak with a journalist for a long-form piece in a magazine focused on women and family. She was not promoting anything. She did not have a book or a podcast or a cause. She agreed because, as she put it, "I said something true in public, and people responded to it in a way that told me they needed to hear it, and I think I owe them the rest of it." She spoke for 2 hours. She described the 8 months between discovering the truth and the Family Feud taping with the clinical precision of a woman who has had a long time to understand what she went through. She talked about the decision not to tell anyone, the calculation that once she told someone, events would begin moving in a direction she could not control, and she was not yet ready to give up control of her own story. She talked about the specific loneliness of that period. She talked about sitting in church on Sunday mornings and singing hymns about truth and feeling the irony of it with a sharpness that was almost funny. She was asked about the moment on the Fast Money podium. Said, "I did not plan it. I planned to answer 5 questions and go home and figure the rest out later. But when he asked me that question, what does a wife find out about her husband that completely changes how she sees him, I just heard myself answer it honestly. And after 8 months of not being honest with anyone, including myself about what I was going to do, it felt like putting down something very heavy. You do not realize how heavy it was until it is on the floor." It was asked about Curtis. "Curtis is a complicated man," she said. "He is not a monster. He is a man who made choices for a long time that prioritized his own comfort over the people who trusted him. That is a serious thing. It is also a human thing, which does not excuse it, but does mean I am capable of understanding how it happened without accepting that it was acceptable. Both of those things are true at the same time." Curtis and Valerie separated 3 months after the episode aired. The separation was, by both accounts, handled with more restraint and mutual dignity than many people expected. There were no public accusations. There were no social media salvos. There were 2 people who had built 26 years of life together sitting down with lawyers and dividing what they had built in a manner that reflected, at minimum, a residual respect for what the other person had contributed to it. They spent 8 months in that process before the divorce was finalized. During that time, they made a shared decision about the one thing that both of them had always agreed on: their children. They would not make Simone and Andre choose. They would not use them as messengers. They would not poison 24 and 21 years of parenting with the bitterness of an ending. They held to that decision imperfectly, the way people hold to difficult decisions, but they held to it. Valerie has said that the decision to end the marriage was the easiest decision she made in the entire process. "Some people stay," she said. "I respect that. It was not what I could do. What I could do was leave with my self-respect completely intact, and that is what I did." Curtis has not spoken publicly about the experience. His silence has been consistent and complete, which speaks more clearly than most statements. Simone processed what happened the way teachers process hard things, by eventually turning them into something useful. She started a support group at the school where she teaches, nominally for students navigating family difficulty, which has quietly become something larger. She has said in conversations with family that watching her mother on that stage reframed something fundamental for her about what courage actually looks like. "I thought courage looked like not being afraid," she has said. "Mama showed me it looks like being terrified and standing there anyway with your chin up." Andre struggled more visibly in the months after the broadcast, in the specific way that sons struggle when the architecture of their family turns out to be different from what they believed it was. He went to counseling for a year, his mother's suggestion, offered not as a directive, but as an act of love from a woman who understood the value of professional help from 23 years of working in healthcare. He has said it was the most important thing he did in his 20s. He is more open about that than men his age typically are, which says something about what he learned from his mother about the cost of keeping things to yourself. At an event in Atlanta 13 months after the episode aired, Steve Harvey was asked about the Beaumont family during a Q&A. He spoke about it at length, without notes, in the way he speaks about things that have stayed with him. "I think about Valerie Beaumont regularly," he said. "Not because of what happened to her, though that was a serious thing. I think about what she did with it. She carried something for 8 months, and she never let it make her ugly. She never let it make her bitter. She showed up to that studio and she played that game like she had nothing on her mind except winning. And then she told the truth. And then she kept standing." He paused for a long moment. "People ask me what the most powerful thing I have ever seen on my show is, and I have seen a lot. I have seen people win money that saved their families. I have seen people share things that changed rooms full of strangers. But what Valerie Beaumont did that day, carrying that weight for 8 months, and then setting it down in public and then standing straight and playing out the rest of the game, I do not have a word for what that is. It is beyond brave. It is something older than brave. It is what women have been doing since the beginning of time, and almost never getting credit for, and it is time we started saying so out loud." Valerie is still a licensed practical nurse. She was offered a supervisory position at her hospital 18 months after the divorce was finalized, and she accepted it, partly because she had earned it and partly, as she has said privately, because there was something clarifying about a period of upheaval that had shown her clearly what she was capable of. She knows now, in a way she did not know before, that she can carry more than she thought. She would prefer not to have learned it the way she learned it, but she knows it. She and Patricia take a trip together every spring, nothing elaborate, usually a long weekend within driving distance. The trip started the year after the divorce, Patricia's initiative, offered with no particular explanation except that Valerie had told the truth in public and deserved to be taken somewhere beautiful. They have been to the Blue Ridge Mountains, to New Orleans, to a beach in South Carolina where they sat for 2 days and read books and ate seafood, and talked about nothing in particular and everything that mattered. Valerie has said these trips are the thing she looks forward to most all year. Simone's support group has grown to include parents as well as students. The school district took notice and asked her to help develop a family resilience curriculum that will be piloted in 4 schools next year. She is 27 years old. She is, by every account of everyone who has worked with her, extraordinary. Andre finished his degree and is working in social services in Charlotte, a career choice that surprised no one who knew what he had been through and what he had done with it. He volunteers 2 evenings a week at a community center. He called his mother when he got the job and she cried, which she rarely does, and he told her it was her example that pointed him in that direction. And she said that was the best thing anyone had ever said to her. And in Valerie's home, a smaller house now, 2 miles from the family house she left, with a garden in the back that she planted from scratch the spring after she moved in, there is a small sign above the kitchen window. It is a line from a hymn she has known her whole life, in her mother's handwriting on a card that was found in a box of her mother's things after she passed. It reads, "The truth is not the end of the story. It is where the story actually begins." Valerie sees it every morning. She planted tomatoes this year for the first time, something she had always meant to do and never gotten around to when there were other things competing for her attention. They came in well. She ate the first one standing in the garden in the early morning light before anyone else was awake, and she said later that it tasted like something she could not quite name, like something that had been worth waiting for. If Valerie's story moved you, if her courage reminded you of someone you love or something you have been carrying yourself, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. These are the stories that matter most. Hit the notification bell so you never miss one.